3 seconds, going live now. I'll start again. Okay, in this session we'll discuss open science, who pays the bill. And what we'll be talking about is who pays for open science and what does that mean for inclusivity. I have 3 people here at the table and 1 panelist online. On my far right is Franco P, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, who teaches cognitive neuroscience and data science. All good? Dr. Pastili's focus on understanding brain networks and brain-wide matter, and made major efforts for promoting openness, trust, and standardization. So thanks for being here. Next to him is Cyril P, who is a senior research software developer in the Department of Neurology and Neurobiology Research Unit in Copenhagen. And Dr. Burnett also has a long history with open science, in particular data sharing for open neuropets and public neuro. How do I pronounce that? Okay, yeah, thanks. And who has worked on a variety of topics, including neurodevelopmental disorders, reading, and auditory processing using MRI, EEG, and MEG. So welcome. And next to me is Jean-Baptiste P, who is an associate professor in the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery at McGill University. Sorry. Dr. Pauline is leading researcher in the fields of fMRI, imaging genetic research, and neuroinformatics. And through his research, he has developed several novel data analysis techniques in statistical modeling and inference for functional brain imaging. And then our speaker online is Pierre B, who is associate professor at the Department of Psychology of University in Montreal and principal investigator in the Laboratory for Brain Stimulation and Exploration at the Montreal Geriatrics Institute. So welcome to all of you. The first question I would like to ask you is, with a growing interest in open science, we wonder about what it means to be more inclusive. If different people pay for open science and there's a shift in researchers paying for science or readers paying for science, what does that mean for inclusivity and accessibility of research? Whoever wants to take the mic.
So that's related to accessibility of articles and I think when there's a big movement though for open that the articles are paid with the lab money or university money or grant money, and then they are open for everyone. Like I think that movement has started. I would say 5-10 years ago or something like that, and it is still growing. But you still have a lot of resistance, in actually many journals and publishers on that front. So the question is, yes, absolutely, there will be some disparity and some unfairness in terms of access. There's the principle that people think of, okay, you have access to something that you pay for in some ways, and for research where research is more like a general good, that principle doesn't really the market principle doesn't work very well, or at least should be mitigated by some other things. So I think I'm still seeing and hoping for more the development of the open access, and also who is paying for those things is the next question, I guess.
Yeah, do you think that leads to rich universities or labs with a lot of funding being able to publish more, at least more open access?
I mean, You mean publish if you reach like 10K in Nature? Well, yeah. 13? Oh my God. But I think there's also some journals who do interesting models if they're non-profit. So for instance, PLOS is relatively expensive to pay. But then you can look at their accounts at the end of the year, and some of the extra monies that they make allows to pay for people who cannot afford to publish in PLOS. So that covers, so like rich pays for poorer in a way, right? Everybody has to pay at some point. And of course, you've got other journals who try to lower the fees, right? So Steve there at the front done something like this. It's like, okay, now things are too expensive. We're gonna switch publisher so we can get something decent price. So I think, you know, there is a lot of changes happening, but good direction. But yeah, at the moment, that's still not very good in terms of like, you're rich, you can get, you know, open access in Nature. 13K, wow.
Okay. I just pay for one. It's complicated. So we actually have a whole panel this afternoon about at 3 p.m. about diversity and inclusion and data sets and how to work with low, medium income countries. So it's complicated because it depends on who you're thinking. Are you thinking, small colleges and university in the high income countries? That is already a challenge because, you know, they're like rich labs probably are not in smaller university or in like more established university. That is a challenge, right? So they have less grants, they're working with undergrads and it's expensive. At the same time, there's also low and middle income countries where the challenges are completely different. And it's not just about the publishing, but also the access to the resources to do the quality of science and publishing and all that. So one thing that it's become clear to me over the past actually 10 years that JB said that the new movement has come is that there's an underlying bad shift that comes with open publishing. We're moving the cost from infrastructure that university have established. So every dollar that I make in a grant at my university, the university receive $1.58. And those 58 cents that I don't see pay for my library. And my library pays for licenses. That is not what happens when I publish open. When I publish open, I take my research funds. That what we talk about is about 2 summers of a graduate student, and I pay with those research funds into a publication. So research that I could have used to discovery and develop new tools, etc. I think that's something that we might be able to solve as a community, and we should address how to get back the open fees into the libraries. I did talk to a couple of the libraries, and they say it's very expensive, it's unsustainable, et cetera, but they are draining money already with, you know, funding going to the other. So maybe it is something that we can have a conversation with again. But yeah, so there's, even for the higher cost universities, effectively that you're seeing shifting and draining of money from research funds into publications, which is not good. Right?
Yeah. Do you have some input on this, Pierre?
Sure. I mean, I think there's no denying that the costs are too high and that for many journals, the system seems broken. Or is it more broken than it was before? It's not clear because it's pretty broken before as well. I think that has created some reaction, like the Melba journal, Machine Learning for Biomedical Imaging, which is free. Neuron Behavior Data Analysis and Theory. It's another journal that is essentially a preprint overlay. So you can have open access and not have those outrageous fees. Now there's obviously a balance to be found with a strain on volunteering work. It's another form of cost that those journals, you know, rely extensively upon. And you know, regarding your, so yeah, basically I think there is a problem in the current system, because those two journals are more niche than mainstream at this point in time. And it's just like, I feel like the inclusivity in journals right now is not just about the cost. To get in, imaging is very expensive, period. Collecting imaging data is expensive. Having the computational resources to compete with the top labs is expensive. So I feel like, to get a Nature paper, unfortunately, even if you have 13K, it's not going to be enough. The network and a number of other things going for you. So I don't think that's the only part of the equation, is what I'm trying to say. But that particular part is definitely highly problematic.
Thank you. To stick with the open access for one moment longer, do you think there's a relation between publishing open access and impact factors? And I'm especially asking this because I think for a lot of early career researchers, that matters a lot. And if there is a relation between open access publishing and impact factors, it's quite hard to motivate yourself to publish open access if that comes at a cost of impact factor. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think, most journals Nature Neuroscience, they all offer an option. So there are good journals that are more affordable. Maybe that's what you're thinking, that are open, yes, right? And there, maybe the impact factor is a little bit lower, etc. Yeah, that's due to the history. The journals are more recent, and maybe their niche, their definition is not as general. Like a Nature publishes in every field, so everyone competes for those 20 articles per month, right? And so it's very high competition, whereas a journal that is focused on neuroimaging, it's less competition, even though we publish a lot. So yeah, I think it is slightly independent and less, but there is a little bit of a cost of choosing some of these more specialistic journals that are directly open.
Actually, MRI that Pierre was mentioning is actually a very, very kind of a well-recognized journal in its community and is entirely free. So that's not, that's maybe a counterexample of a, I just want to reemphasize that, we're paying for reputation. I think that's the, once a journal has established a very high reputation, then that journal, to some extent, has the community hostage. You can there's no who is going to care in a rich lab to pay another $3,000 if it's a Nature paper or a science paper, or nobody cares, because as Pierre was mentioning as well, this neuroimaging is expensive in any way, so you put that a few thousand more dollars in the grant, and that's that's not the end of the world. But I think that's the problem really, is that linkage between the reputation of a journal and our the community capacity to change those things. And I just want to reemphasize the fantastic move that that has been done by Steve on the imaging neuroscience, because that is an example where the community gets back the the reputation and the capacity to actually choose how much those things should cost and how much they I think that's a a brilliant example of how the research community should be, can actually do something, but at the moment there's a system that is very much like kind of a local minima that is super hard to get out of.
Yeah, you want to? I don't know if this is a good moment, but I have a crazy idea that I have been thinking for a while. If you look at how actors work, right? They make a movie, or any artist, right? They make a movie, they work on the movie, and they get royalties from the movie for the rest of their lives. I think we're actors, right? So we write a paper, a movie, right? But we don't get anything forever. We pay for it, right? Who gets the royalty is the publisher. And we review. So we like partner maybe with building a good movie, like maybe we're behind the scenes of a movie. Everyone that works behind the scene of a movie gets royalty, small ones, for the rest of their lives. So actors have a guild. Going socialist. They have a guild that establishes this type of work and how the work is done. And I think potentially we could have a guild. We could think as societies, but societies are not quite the same thing. So establishing the fact that, hey, this is my paper, this is my work, I want 1 cent per year for the rest of every time it's cited, right? Or something like that. So that is potentially a way to rethink about completely the power struggle here. And I think we had to unite or unionize for doing something like this, because how do you go about fighting very expensive, large publishing houses, etc. Yeah, you can do like moves like Steve did, which is great, and then fund a new journal that is cheap, and then think about cost every year. But it's one at the time, and we recognize this is a problem all over the board.
Pierre wants to no. Just yeah, I think the essential aspect of the problem is that the publishing companies, are just companies. They need to grow and make money, and that's their main goal. Their main goal is not to. They do make money through the diffusion of science, but that's not their. There's always a bit of a interplay, of course, and you want to have a company that does good and so on. But the key aspect is that they have to grow economically. I think that's what they do at their companies. So I think putting back the publishing sort of industry in universities or in societies that are actually governed more like for the in some ways they have like more linkage with the research and the and what they are aiming at. I think that's an idea that should catch at some stage. But the problem is that it's very, very slow. It's extremely slow. Like so, for instance, Aperture was also Aperture Neuro was actually partly born of the idea that that's a publication that is an OHBM sort of a grown publication, and therefore OHBM has elected council. They can let's say have their say on how much that should cost for the researchers and all those things, because because OHBM is not a company, it's like a society. So that's where we can shift the balance a little bit, but growing those reputations and making sure that it is actually as useful for an early career researcher to publish in Aperture Neuro or others than in other journals is going to be a super slow process. I don't see any kind of a fast track on that problem. Maybe someone has some ideas.
What I wonder about the shift you're talking about, would that involve more unpaid voluntary hours? Because it seems that open science does come with more voluntary work compared to the big companies who are at least paying their employees. Well, so there's a dilemma there, right? If you just rely on more people doing things for free.
So that is a very important question and topic, but I think it may be related, right? But I believe if you start an open journal or a journal that is more affordable, you don't necessarily not pay people. You can still pay people if the journal is successful. I think so I'm happy to go there maybe after this, but I would like to conclude something on related to JB's point. That is true. There is one challenge by following societies and building journals. you're never going to build a journal that will compete with the top generalist journals, because these are specialistic journals. The quality of science could be great, but the ultimate needs, especially in the US, right, or maybe UK is the same, you need to try to get your papers in the top journals to be seen, to be recognized, especially when you're young, but also when you're established. And building, a journal on neuroscience and a journal specialistic to societies, it's never going to compete with Nature, with Science, and with other. It's hard in terms of quality. Citations, it's a different story. Citations, they still compete. I wanted to play the devil advocate.
Just maybe to speak a little bit concretely, like in the past, we had human brain mapping and neuroimage, and they were expensive for the libraries, but they were free for the researchers, and they had a very decent impact factor, and you could do your career by publishing in those journals. At least I did. So that was great. And the thing that when they did the switch to open access, the fees were, too high for many people. At least, the editorial board of Neuroimage felt this way. And eventually they resigned. And now we have a couple of alternatives, Aperture Neuro and Imaging Neuroscience, which are open access and have reasonable article processing charges. But at the moment, they do not have the impact factor and the sort of like prestige that necessarily will back primary publication of a career. Now, I feel like Imaging Neuroscience is doing it right, that they are on track to get there. Aperture Neuro also seems to be, on an upward trajectory, even though after a slow start. So, I'm really hoping that in a few years, it will be a no-brainer. You can publish in those journals, pay a reasonable fee, and have an impact factor that's high enough that any recruitment committee will look at this as, top-tier material, but we're not there.
Oh, sorry, the worst camera view ever. Yeah, so quick question. So it's interesting trying to change the funding model by taking out the individual journal editorial board. But when I think of the major shifts in funding that have happened, it's been about at the institutional levels, the German funding system deciding that no, when Elsevier put their funding model forward, they say, no, that's too much. We're going to hold out and we're going to have a wholesale shift in what they're offering. How do you get it to that level where you're getting the institutions to say, you need to change your practices or you need to change what you're offering for that money, either at the institution or the larger block level?
I'm going to enter first before you can answer. So anyone in the audience can just come up and ask questions. You can also post your questions in the OHBM app if you don't want to come forward.
I don't have an answer to that question, Nils. I guess there's a lot of advocacy and awareness building and all those things that have actually already moved, as you said, some of those aspects. But then at some stage it depends on the knowledge and awareness of deciders at some and sometimes deans or provosts of universities are lobbied by Elsevier or big companies and they're being sold things that are and that disconnection sometimes with the general scientific community makes those decisions difficult to control. So I think my only answer is advocacy, awareness, and we're a small group, and there's a big, it's a big conference, and we're a small group in this room, and so I think there's maybe more to be done on the on that. But we know that system is really broken. The reviewers are not paid, editors are not paid, and the only profitable things, authors are not paid, but the only profit is going to company.
Franco had a good point. Librarians have a huge role Like I used to when I was in UK, I used to talk a lot with librarians. They have their own conferences. And I think that's really the people that we as a community need to talk to, because they are the ones who can lobby the deans and so on and say, listen, because, you know, within a country, they talk to each other, librarians, and I think they are the ones who can really make the change, talking to the deans and so on. And that's us who have to talk to them and then convince them, and they then have to really, because we are not the only community, right? So maybe we are not happy, but maybe people in history are happy about the model. I don't know. I don't think they are, but you get my point.
There's a couple of people.
Yes, that you can ask the questions. After that, I would like to steer the conversation in direction of other costs of open science, because now this is turning into a publishing session, which is a really important and great topic. So I don't mind, but I would like to leave some time to discuss other costs of open science as well. But please come forward.
Thanks. My point just builds on the current discussion, so hopefully it's helpful. I wonder if you could talk about the distinction in business models between journals that are fully open access, meaning there's no subscription, and the sort of double dipping model of subscription journals like Nature and Science, where the universities are still paying a subscription, but then the researchers are also paying an open access APC, and how that works from a sustainability perspective for institutional costs. Like you said, talking to librarians, maybe there are transformative agreements happening for open access publishing, so you can still use institutional funds, but in the other direction. And kind of what your take is on those hybrid journals in particular.
My comment directly follows on that, so maybe I can interrupt. So we actually had quite an interesting experience when we were doing the imaging neuroscience switch with the Oxford libraries. So the Oxford libraries are very much part of the UK's institutional block deal with, say, Elsevier and the others. And I kind of expected them, I went to them for just general advice, like, how do you feel about what we're doing? And I kind of expected them to say, don't bother your little heads with this, just one journal will take care of all of this. And they said the opposite. They said, this is fantastic. You are putting pressure on from one end, and you're really helping us get a better deal. So this kind of thing is really valuable. And I believe that, and they were trying to push for a good deal, but the deal they got is really not that good. Like NeuroImage is not even included in the deal that the UK got in the end. So there's like no reduction for them at all. So it's, I think all of the stuff we're talking about is valuable regardless of what is slowly happening with institutional deals, and most of them are not that great.
Yeah, thank you, Niels. Otherwise, it's not a great view on the camera.
But I'll follow up.
Sorry, Pierre.
I'll briefly follow up on that. My proposal is like, let's build a guild, because, you know, one journal at a time is great, but we are the ones that actually can move these things, and one journal at a time is going to take a long time, but maybe we can coordinate across the board. Not a society. Society are specialized and they're domain specific. This has to be something that connects across the societies. That's when you can really make an impact to all journals, right? To all journals can be changed, can change in the way image neuroscience has changed, neuroimage. So I think that's what I was trying to say before. We can build a union that works on this across, and that's where we can put some of the time and the effort as a society connecting to the other society. There's a question.
Right. I wanted to ask, so it's a maybe like a far-fetched perspective because I'm still in early career, but what are your thoughts on this Chris Chambers model on like peer-run, peer-reviewed platform for reviewing? So this is like completely getting rid of profit journals. And another one is, I read this blog article about rise and fall of peer review that basically proposes that people put out their research as preprint. And if you think about open source tools, people cite them anyway. They are really dying to cite these preprints. So what are your thoughts about these completely alternative models? And in the end, maybe publications also can have version updates, correct mistakes, and share the code and the data set together so that it becomes like an entity that is completely maintained. Yeah.
Well, I mean, does feel very much like we're at a point in history where the publishing industry is ready for disruption. That they are pushing, ridiculously inefficient business models, and people somehow accept it. And that, if there's good alternative journals that emerge, then they will just take over. And maybe the route you're describing, which is to have some kind of a peer review platform and get rid of professional publishers entirely, have just preprint and peer review platforms. Maybe that's the future. I believe eLife is actually looking in that direction very much. But so far it hasn't really happened. And, I'm really hoping that Imaging Neuro will be and Aperture Neuro will be our ways of getting out of the claws of historical publishers, but only future will tell.
Yeah, I think, the fundamental problem is that it's a whole ecosystem. It goes up to when someone is going to write a grant, and the reviewer has, reputation as university hire. All those things are still very much based on journal reputation and that. And the journal reputation is linked to the journal name. First of all, that impact factors, those things are linked to, even if they are super bad measures, they're still very much prominent. And changing a whole culture is extremely hard. It's just changing a whole culture. So the fundamental problem is that the journal names and reputation are owned by companies. If the journal names and reputation were owned by, let's say, research societies, universities, or things like that, then you make the market work, which is, if a publisher does a good job and is cheaper than another one, I can switch. There's no switch possible. You can't. Steve could talk about that. Switching is super hard. It's going to take a long time to rebuild and to less because of the great the whole move aspect is I think was the right thing to do, but it's still very hard. So the whole system is it's not only the journal and it's the reviewer, the universities, it's the whole system that has to move. So finding ways of slowly nudging and moving that system is what we need to do. It's hard, but I'm hoping that reputation will build. Imaging neuroscience will get a good reputation. Aperture Neuro hopefully will get a good reputation, and slowly, and in Aperture Neuro, for instance, if we're not happy with the publisher, we can move because the name again is not attached to the company that does the publishing. So I think that's the problem that we need to solve to some extent.
The name is, the reputation is not. The name is owned by but I want to say that I think all the journals will start and are starting to publish the data, the versions. They're going there. It's a slow process. We'll get there. Right? Reproducible science is becoming something important. But at the same time, I want to say that just publishing code on your website or like a very entry-level journal that are really easy to publish, it's going to be okay, especially if your toolbox ends up being very used, right? Especially if you're working on toolbox, but there's also experimental work, etc. And I think for the young people, I would say that you have to think that competition is good. It's good for you and it's good for us, right? Trying to get and achieve high goals is important. So as a change, lowering the bar, it's not a good solution for everyone. We need people that try hard to achieve and make important projects and important changes. We need you guys to believe that that's important. So it is important to try to get to Nature. It's a pity that Nature is a company. It's important to try to get to journal where you compete across the board, where your work is believed and reviewed to be top journals, top value. And it's more work, right? I normally count like a neuron paper is about 5 papers that I send to other journals. That's the amount of work my lab puts into something like that. In nature methods, it's more than that. It's like 3 to 5 years work that gets into nature methods in my lab. But that's okay. Because that's okay. I mean, it's good to get some friction, but I think it is really important to also communicate to the students and to the young folks that you have to try. Don't give up.
I will let Pierre react first. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I think it may be a little bit too strong to equate, publishing in Nature with the very large scope of project and better science. I think there's really, really good science that take many, many years, that go in specialty journals, and that you don't need to publish in Nature to have a good career, hopefully. And I personally don't think it's a great message.
Put a lot of work in something that is not important too, right?
Thank you, Franco, for giving me an excuse to steer away the conversation from publishing. But I want to build on your point, because, for instance, I am one of those people that tried very hard to write software and tried to maintain it and trying to make it fairly maintainable by itself by many different ways. But the main issue that I'm encountering in this moment, in which maybe I'm a couple of years into the work, I released all of my software, it's automatized, it's controlled, we have at Zenodo.doi and etc., maintainers and etc. I still have a lot of issues finding a way to make it maintainable by, for instance, finding the money, finding the grants to hire somebody to keep it going. And I think one of those problems is that most of the time grants mainly look for my CV and the CV of the other maintainers involved, but also look for the publications that I did not have because I did not have money to publish, or maybe it's just as another DOI, and so it's really not considered that much. And so maybe I can ask. I mean, on one side, I think that your point was a little bit naive to a certain extent. I'm very sorry, but I'm going to be blunt about it. But on the other side, I might ask, okay, so what are your suggestions in that case to try to find somebody to pay the bill to sustain the issue of open science softwares and open science initiatives that are otherwise not funded?
Which part is naive? How is it naive?
Well, if I cannot get a grant because I don't have the publications to get a grant, how can I maintain my software?
Okay, so
without having a job that allows me to do that.
So let me try again. So there's very hard problems out there that are really important, and there's very hard problems out there that are not. Pick one that is important. You can then send that one. So it's true that it's not every software packages, every problem that you're trying to solve with software or non-software, we can go to iJournals, right? And now I'm not defending them. Right? I'm saying simply that it is important to establish journals that are general enough so you compete with physicists, not just within our community. Those are the journals that will show that what you're doing is important, right? So going to Nature versus going to a journal that is specialistic says that your work was general enough as a problem. And look, I came from Indiana University. And I don't want to say anything bad about Indiana University. It's an awesome place. Olaf Sporns is there, but it's a small town of 40,000 people, right? And it is different than when I was at Stanford, where everyone had good ideas and wanted to change the world, right? So I've been there, right? I've been there, like kind of bootstrapping myself out of this situation. Peak, important problem. That's what I try to do. And I don't know if you know what I do. Yeah. Okay, so I have software packages and platforms that are online with operation. So I constantly struggle to make sure that the software is there, is maintainable, sustainable, and is operating, right? There's people here in the room that are checking that the platform is still going. So it is a challenge. pick important problems. And then the rest, it is unfortunate. Here is the person that comes. Unfortunately, there is this issue that in the US, I don't know how it's in Canada, in Europe, and other. In the US, the program officers need those journals because they have to go to Congress. They like literally, I am told, publish to Nature, right? Because they need to go and tell the government, look what we did with your money. So you have to think about it. Now, I am absolutely, majority of my work that goes into great journals, specialistic, etc., right? But you have to try every 5-7 years to pick a problem that is important enough and that you can send there. And look, everyone in this room has done this, right? Or try, especially the people that are established, right? JB, Steve, like Cyril. We all try, and we all know that that is important. We would love for them not to be companies, and we would. And I think the guild is my solution. So it's not quite naive. It's more like this is the way it works, man. That's how the business works.
I think I will try again to switch to step away from the publishing for a moment. We have some more time left, and I would like to hear your thoughts on other invisible or mostly invisible costs of open science. We were talking just now about software. Who is maintaining software? I mean, it's getting more and more the standard that you publish your code or you publish software that is freely available. But someone is writing it, someone needs to maintain it, it needs to be hosted somewhere. What do you think of those kind of costs to open science?
I'm sure Pierre will have a lot to say about that as well. I mean, my standard, I would say, almost response to that is as much as we can make those software across several labs, across several, I mean, within the community, like, you know, but that's not the general case. But, you know, for instance, let me pick nylon, with Pierre is involved very much in. I think my lab is involved. Bertrand's lab is involved. Like, so it's the bus factor or the truck factor of that project is not in terms of the number of developers. It's the number of labs. If I don't get a grant, you know, if I don't get the next CZI, maybe Bertrand has some money to fund a a maintainer, or maybe Pierre will have some funds from like a foundation, or and if we can distribute those efforts, that's it requires good governance model. It requires that the software is still functional because it's harder to maintain and to agree on and to move something when there's a lot of us. But it's like many of us, and you can go less fast, but maybe more for a longer time. So I think that's my standard response. It's not the perfect response, and in reality it's just hard, and in reality things are a bit more complex. But I think that's one philosophy at least that I'm trying to adopt and push.
Yeah.
Well, everything that JP said was great. I wish there were some mechanisms to sustain software in the long term. So there's where I live, there are grants that found like networks of researchers for the very long run, like 15 years plus. And typically that allocate very little funds to infrastructure, and infrastructure is very rarely software. But I feel if those folks actually started allocating money to software support, this could really help those more like community-driven entities to strive. Otherwise, what JB was saying, like the network effect, that you can get together, it facilitates, first of all, writing group grants, and also if one node goes down in terms of support they can have, other ones can pick up. But at the end of the day, Nylearn or Scikit-learn had full-time engineers from the start, because France actually pays engineers to work on infrastructure in some instances. So I feel like having some institutional support would be great. And in Canada, where I'm at, there's not a lot of mechanisms for that.
As much as I totally agree with JB and Pierre on like, this is the best way to keep it alive, but now these guys are the naive ones now, or idealists, I would say, because the truth is most of the software we use are maintained by very small amount of people, and they belong, I would say, to labs in general, right? If you take FSL, SPM, AFNI, clearly it's identified groups, right? Maybe AFNI a little bit different because it's NIH, but still. Same for what Franco is developing. Same in the EEG world, right? Even if you say, well, but MNE, for instance, is Python, is a bit more open. Well, but realistically, it's still very small amount of people who do the job. And I would say that, unfortunately, at the moment, toolbox are work of love of a small, small group of people who just work on a project. And it's not very suitable for students because it doesn't, like, the problem is the tension, right? It's not suitable for students short term, even though long term, I do think it pays because that's where you get more involved and work with more people at the end. And well, science is mostly, I would say, you know, collaborations and getting idea exchanged. And that's how it works. Through tools, really, that's where you get most of your ideas. But, you know, I agree with you, it's best way to maintain it long term when you've got more labs involved, but it's unfortunately not how it works at the moment, right?
I mean, there are different models. You know, like clearly, you're right. Most of our, you know, the biggest tools, or like, you know, are maintained by one lab, and I think it's also good for those labs. Of course, they're very well recognized, and they, you know, it's I'm sure it's hard to maintain the developers and the maintainers of the you know, for grants, but it's, you know, it's good for those labs as well. So I think it's so. But there are counterexamples again. I mean, I don't think there's only one model at the moment. What we just have to think is what is the best model, and which is the best model. So I think you know, BIDS is another sort of more like a community enterprise. There are software associated with BIDS, and BIDS maintainers, there are, you know, many BIDS maintainers that are paid by different labs, right? So I think, yeah, you're right. There's the kind of a lab-centric, you know, software is prominent, but it's not the only model.
But I'm not saying it's good, because I'm saying if it's a buzz factor, if the lab dies, the software dies. Right?
So if you pick something important, either more labs will work on it, or you will get funding. Now, you don't know often when you start something if something is important, right? But these are what's going on today, right? So either there's JBs and Pierres and others working on iLearn, because it turns out it's an important, interesting project, right? Or they get funding in a single lab, right? And to develop, say, FSL, and then people continue to get funding because it's highly used. So something is important, is used as a toolbox, and you will get funding. That is the current model. We could also do something else that, given what we talked before, every dollar I make from my grants, I get 58% to my university, of which some of those go to the libraries. Well, maybe some of those dollars to the libraries could be built back into paying to software support for toolboxes that are important. This is something that we can talk. There is already a mechanism to get these overheads, and why those overheads go only to books or journals. Maybe they should go to like established repositories and standards. That's another point I want to make. And then the third that was touched is incentive structure. It is true, right? BIDS goes to RAS in the US. At the end of the game, because he started, Chris left, and you know, if in 20 years there's 200,000 BIDS standards, very well developed, you know, we all happy and contributing to it, and maybe got funding for it, etc. But ultimately, the leader, the funder, has, you know, that legacy on their CV. So that is a difficult one to change because it effectively, it's an incentive structure. How do you change it? It is also important that it is true that if someone starts something, they get recognition, right? Scorsese is one of my favorite directors. Can't say that Scorsese didn't make his movies, right? I mean, and these movies had long-term legacy. I like to be the devil's advocate always.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out two things. First, that in the discussions about open science, open tools, and the rest, I encounter the discussion, yes, good idea, but it doesn't work, and there's another, the incentives of reality is different. And actually, discussion partly is right now, yeah, we got to do this, it's slow, but it's how it works, and just do it. This is mixed messages. I think it's problematic if it's also here, the discussion later. That's one point. The other point is that the problem for sustaining software and over time is one thing, and that's you discuss. But the other thing is, how can I get a student who has 3 years, maybe 4, to work on that and then being lucky to find something that actually is interesting, and the rest, it's irresponsible somehow to force somebody, and then maybe it works and maybe not. So the question is then, if they see something that could work, how can we sustain that, and on the other hand, still have them to have a career and not only by luck? So the question is because I think there got to be 2 ways, or one have to sustain the other. So it's basically, how can you structure this? The same with established. You can publish in not that high journals and actually push these journals, but for the youngers, you have to allow and push as well. So in the end, it's 3-way argument in the sense of, you have both, but what to sustain, what to push, or how to sustain what we want with how it works, right? And I think that's where the core is of the how we move forward. And to say just how it works is not the point, I think.
I think the idea that a lot of the work is being done by students in terms of maybe even software maintenance and all those things, it will definitely. To me, my take on that is we should hack again the publication system. Software and maintaining a software we should be able to recognize those things through publications, but also so if BITS as a publication. First of all, I don't think it is only us. It was a whole group of people. But there's a long list of people that are associated with that. Latest publication, for instance, on BIT. So I think so hacking the system such that you can say, hey, to the students, you'll get as much credit for that software library and that for a paper on some scientific topic. I think that's if you build a microscope, if you build you'll be some people have got Nobel Prize for the tools that they've built, right? And I think that's so the tools are part of the science. It's
Pierre, you wanted to say something as well?
Yeah, community-driven projects are not just important projects that are very successful and attract other people. Community-driven projects don't, come by just luck. You need to plan for them. You need to give a structure for them. And BITS has a clear governance, and Rust Project plays a big role, but it's not Rust project. And there's many people who've published on the BITS extension, get citation, get recognition for their work. And there's many people who get their voice heard to make decisions. And because it is transparent and because it is community-driven, it also attracts to a scale that is very hard to achieve when it's just your lab making the decision and making the calls ultimately. And our community is ultimately really small, so we don't have huge success stories. But this idea of taking a more community-driven approach has led to massively successful stories. So Scikit-learn is one, Jupyter Books is another one. And I think what you get out of it compared to single lab project is quality. When many people look at a code base, many people discuss the decisions to shape the code base, you end up with better software. And because we're talking about infrastructures that many labs are building on, this is obviously worth it. Now, I understand why we wouldn't do it 20 years ago, because there was no recipe. But now there is a recipe. So for me, that's the way to make a project sustainable in the long term. Yeah.
Thank you. I see that there is one question. It's going to be the last question because we're massively running out of time.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one more minute, right?
Yes, what I will say is at 11:30, there is a table talk related to this panel discussion where everyone can join in to discuss more on this topic. And it won't be audience and panel, but it will be a discussion where everyone can talk and everyone can answer.
Where?
In this same room.
Okay.
So it's 11:30.
So then I'll not ask a question.
Okay.
So that's good news. I'll just raise something, and I just want your thoughts, or maybe, we can discuss later on. And it's about DeSci. You may have heard of this before. So decentralized science, where you basically leverage blockchain technology and all that stuff. I know most people think of crypto like woo, thieves and everything, but it's actually great technology. And I've put some comments and thoughts into the app. So you may want to read it and we can discuss later, but just a thought.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So everyone is welcome at 11:30 for a discussion all together to talk more on this. Thanks to the panelists and thank you, audience. So yeah, it's in the same room at 11:30.